Well, well. If MangaKamen talked about Eryizo's Johto starters video, I may as well cover his Hoenn starters video, especially since I need something to stretch my video editing legs. By the way, I'm skipping the first 2 minutes, as it's almost nothing but unfunny padding, self-promotion, and other stuff no one cares about. Granted, there is one thing worth noting here. He brings up that Emerald having a different champion changes a lot, which it does. But he also notes the different teams that the gym leaders in Emerald have, which he doesn't really bring up in the video. And by the way, ZeldaWars doesn't contribute anything that Eryizo himself couldn't other than an extra reaction to the results. In a video like this where you try to find the objectively best choice, a second opinion doesn't matter unless they truly have something to add to the conversation, which is what I'm about to provide. What I'm saying is, this didn't need to be a collaboration. Anyways, on to the video that's basically me reading between the lines.
Our journey starts in Professor Birch's briefcase, where we have to make the most important decision in our life. Treecko, Mudkip, or Torchic?
Well, Mudkip is the cutest out of the 3 starters, so it has to be the best, right? I mean, it even has its own meme.
Plus, Swampert not only has the highest base stat total of all fully evolved starters, not counting Megas, but it gets a Mega 2, so that renders that point moot, but it also only has one weakness. Can you name me one other starter with only one weakness? Well, Greninja, that doesn't count!
Even though it was a very close call, Mudkip is not the best.
What? How?
Easy. Mudkip only helps with Roxanne, Watson, Flannery, and Tate and Liza. Other than that, he pretty much goes even with the rest of the gym leaders, with the exception of Wallace, who would give him some trouble.
The Mudkip line can learn Power Punch and Auras by the time you reach Watson, so that'll help with Norman there. Granted, it'll still have to compete with Slacking's literally legendary stats and powerful moves, but it's at least something. With Winona, Swampert also gets Rock Tomb, which is admittedly not the most reliable back then, but is more reliable and stronger in Auras. Ice Beam if you got 4,000 coins in the Marvel Game Corner in the originals at that point, and Rock Slide and Auras by level up, all of which take care of all but her Skarmory, which doesn't resist water moves. Or rock and ice moves for that matter. As for Wallace giving Swampert trouble, yes, Swampert would take neutral damage against water moves. But aside from its 190-90 bulk, none of Wallace's Pokemon save Ludicolo and Gyarados and Emerald resist ground moves, and it'll have Earthquake either by level up or by TM by that point, with the only concerns being Seeking's Horn Drill, which only hits 30% of the time anyway, and Ludicolo's Giga Drain and Emerald, but by that point Swampert has no reason to face Ludicolo over its teammates.
Well, that's true. Plus, most of the Elite Four gives him a few problems too. Sydney has a few grass Pokemon, Glacia has a few water Pokemon, and Drake... well, he has dragons. Dragons are OP.
For one, you don't bring these aspects about anyone else's teams anywhere else in the video, so it comes off as cherry-picking information to make one starter look worse than the other. As for the actual matchups, let's go about this one by one, shall we? Sydney only gave his Cacturne Needle Arm in the originals in Emerald, while Shiftry got Leaf Blade in Auras. In either case, you can get the TM for Ice Beam by then regardless of Game Corner, which takes care of both problems, provided you didn't switch out due to the speed disadvantage that only Shiftry has over Swampert. Even without the abandoned ship, Swampert can learn a few good fighting moves like Brick Break in the originals and Hammer Arm in the remakes, which will do a good number on Sydney's team. Plus, Sharpedo won't resist Earthquake, which will evade Rough Skin. Glacia, like Wallace, has nothing that resists ground moves regardless of game, and it can use fighting moves to hit everything except the Frostless and Auras. Its only issues are the remakes is Freeze Dry, found on her second Glalie, and her Wall Range Sheer Cold, but like Horn Drill, that rarely hits anyway. Once again, it has no reason to be used over a party member that can take care of these kinds of Pokemon anyway. And Drake? That's a joke! Ice Beam to Hotline Bling all the way! Emerald in the remakes gives him Kingdra, but that doesn't resist ground either. And it has Yawn in Auras, which is defeated by the extremely complicated strategy of switching out.
And this is even worse in Pokemon Emerald, where Wallace is the champion this time and completely walls Swampert.
Please refer to what I said earlier about Wallace. Also, way to completely ignore its massive advantage on Steven, where only 2 of his Pokemon take neutral damage against Swampert at best, and the only lead he has on Swampert is Cradley's Giga Drain. Aggron also has Solar Beam, but Swampert's too good to allow Aggron to last more than one hit, and it loses Solar Beam in Auras, where it would have been able to take advantage of it with 30's Gen 5 revision. A little look at their move list can go a long way in changing the results. And it further justifies my bias towards Swampert.
Well, if Mudkip isn't the best, then Treecko has to be the best then. I mean, he does have the type advantage on Wallace, plus he destroys Mudkip in a one-on-one battle.
Well, no. Treecko actually performs worse than Mudkip, even if it is by a little bit. Treecko does well against Roxanne, Tate and Liza, Wallace, and Watson because of the resistance.
Grovyle can also get Power Punch and Noraz by the time you get to Watson, so that'll take care of his Magnemite and Magneton.
The other gems aren't much of a problem except for Flannery and Winona.
You'll have Rock Tomb after Roxanne, and Trico's line can learn it, and we've established that only Winona's Skarmory isn't weak to it. Yes, Sceptile has to worry about Aerial Ace on all of her Pokemon in the originals and Emerald, but in Noraz, Altaria has nothing except Dragon Breath if you chose to Mega Evolve Sceptile, which also gets access to Jewel Chop if it is a Sceptile by then. With Flannery, you got me there. With Brawly, you're right. But with Norman, again, Power Punch and Noraz. Although Grovyle might not be able to endure a 160 physical attack power slacking long enough for a Power Punch to build up.
And as for the Elite Four members, he struggles against Glacier and her Ice types, Drake and his OP Dragon types, and unfortunately the biggest problem, Steven the Champion, with his Steel types.
Generalization is your biggest problem here. Glacia has 3 water types in her team in the originals and Emerald, and Ice only resists 1 type. Itself. The remakes replace her Celios with Frostless, which Sceptile can Night Slash away if you went to the move relearner with a Heart Scale and Follower, which also gives it an advantage against Phoebe. And Sceptile can also learn Brick Break. Bye bye Glalie! And none of her Pokemon outspeed Sceptile regardless of Mega Form. Hell, if we're gonna be blunt, very few Pokemon in Hoenn can outspeed Sceptile, and only 6 Pokemon so far can outspeed Mega Sceptile. And 3 of those are the same Pokemon! Sceptile can get Dragon Claw by now, Dual Chop and Noraz, and a Mega Evolution to boost both. Sceptile does have to worry about Flamethrower, Fly in the originals, Aerial Ace and Emerald, and all Dragon moves plus Moonblast and Noraz if it Mega Evolves. And like Glacia, none of Drake's Pokemon, not even Salamence, outpaces Sceptile. And while Sceptile faces issues with Steven, given Aerial Ace, Sludge Bomb, Stavex, Scissor, and Aggron's Dragon Claw if it goes Mega, it also gets Bug moves for Cradily and Claydol, the latter of which is also vulnerable to Sceptile's Grass moves, and Earthquake for Aggron and Metagross. Cradily is also vulnerable to Brick Break. Again, move lists can make a big difference. For a topic as heavily debated as this, you need to look as far into it as possible, and present as much evidence as necessary to prove your stance. By simply leaving it at face value like this, and leaving out key advantages, you give a very different impression from what's actually true. An inaccurate one.
So that leaves us with Torchic. Wait, Torchic is the best starter Pokemon? This can't be. How can this thing that looks like a penis be the best starter Pokemon in Hoenn? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't when you leave out crucial victories that some have over others. Seriously, how do you leave out Swampert wrecking Steven? That's a rookie level mistake.
Well, now that I think about it, it kinda does. Yes, Torchic does have a rough start to the game with Roxanne, but if you do evolve it into a Combuskin, you do get access to Double Kick, which does super effective damage. Besides that, it goes even with Brawly and Watson.
Actually, it has the advantage over both. It can learn Peck for Brawly's fighting types, and Watson's aforementioned Magnemite and Magneton are weak to both fire and fighting.
Resist Flannery,
who has a Numel with Magnitude and Emerald and Earth Power and Noraz,
and does really well against Norman. The problem starts with the last 3 gym leaders.
Winona, Wallace, and Tate and Liza all do extremely well against Blaziken. But by the time you encounter those gyms, your team should be well diverse at that point to handle Blaziken's weaknesses.
Now that bites them in the ass hard. It especially applies to Swampert since it starts struggling at Gym 8, which is far more time, especially in Hoenn where the villain team subplot concludes before Gym 8, compared to Gym 6 for Blaziken. Hell, 2 or 3 gyms is enough time to start getting good teammates, let alone 8.
Although Blaziken has the most weaknesses, we felt that it makes up for that by having the most strengths, especially when it comes to the Elite Four. He destroys Sydney, Glacia, and most importantly, Steven.
Sydney has a Sharpedo, which has priority with Aqua Jet and Oraz and outpaces Blaziken either way. Crawdon and Emerald, Shifter has Extrasensory, and Absol has Aerial Ace. Glacia has 2 Celios and a Walrein. All have Surf in the originals, and only the Walrein has it in Emerald, while in Oraz she replaces the Celios for Frostless. No more fighting on them, which also makes it struggle against Phoebe. One of them even has Draining Kiss, and Walrein has Sheer Cold no matter what, which, while it won't hit very often, can still hit. Steven has Skarmory and Armaldo with Aerial Ace, Aggron, Claydol, and Metagross with Earthquake, Armaldo's got Water Pulse, and Metagross has Psychic. In the remakes, Claydol loses Earthquake for Earth Power and packs Extrasensory, Armaldo no longer poses a threat, Metagross' Zen Headbutts does Psychic, and Aggron and Skarmory became much deadlier thanks to Sturdy. They will endure the hit, then Aerial Ace or Earthquake Blaziken to death. Especially Aggron's Earthquake, although stat-boosted Aerial Ace will hurt almost as badly. Compared to Swampert, Blaziken struggles much more with Steven despite having an advantage over 5 of his 6 Pokemon. Sceptile had to worry about less than this.
So there you have it. The definitive best starter in Hoenn is Torchic, right?
Yes, in Ruby and Sapphire. In Emerald, it's a whole nother story. There is one big difference that changes everything: the champion. In Pokemon Emerald, Steven is no longer the league champion. Instead, it's Wallace. By Wallace becoming the champion and Hoenn remaining a water user, this gives Sceptile the upper hand.
Sceptile still has to worry about Juan's Roar Beam, and especially Ice Beam from a neutral Kingdra. Wallace will still give Sceptile hell thanks to Tentacruel, Ludicolo, and Gyarados being neutral to Sceptile's grass moves, the latter having Intimidate, Tentacruel having Sludge Bomb, Wailord having Blizzard if it lives, and Melodic having Ice Beam if it lives. 3 out of 6 with 4 major trouble areas. I did bring up a few points to help Sceptile here, and none of Wallace's or Juan's Pokemon outpace Sceptile, so there's that. And I'll end the video here since it's just a bunch of self-promotion and a link to his and ZeldaWars' comparison between ORAS and the originals, which falls flat thanks to Eryizo, who is on the side of the originals, bringing up Emerald in the playability segment, and arguing that you could get more legendaries in that version despite all of the extra ones being locked behind special event items that you can't get anymore, but I'll leave that video to someone else. Final thoughts? For a casual player, this may be a decent video, since it doesn't overwhelm players with move lists and stats, determining through mere type deduction on who is the best starter. However, that is the biggest problem with the video. By merely taking the scenarios at face value, it paints a very different picture to what is actually true, and whatever goes beyond a mere face value type analysis comes off as cherry-picking information purely for the sake of making one choice look objectively less appealing than the others. I would have reacted this way regardless if Mudkip was the subject. I've done the research needed for a topic as heavily debated as this, and with the various moves, times to get said moves, types, and weaknesses considered across both the original games and ORAS, they're very closely matched, all having at least 7 advantages between the Elite Four, Gym Leaders, and Champion, truly showing that there is no wrong choice between all 3. Regardless of the originals or ORAS, Swampert leads at 9, while ORAS gives Sceptile and Blaziken 8. I'd have given both Winona in that instance, but lack of stab in their case could mean that her Pokemon live the hit and they land Aerial Ace. Sceptile has advantages over Roxanne, Watson due to its resistance, Tate and Liza where its biggest issue is Xatu and Emerald, but only by not being super effective against it. Xatu doesn't have any counters for Sceptile. Wallace, Sydney with Bug and Fighting moves, Glacia due to Celio, Walrein and Fighting moves, and Drake with Dragon Claw. It gains more in ORAS with Phoebe thanks to Night Slash, and Drake thanks to Dual Chop and its Mega, but it already had that one. Blaziken has advantages over Roxanne, Brawley due to Peck, Watson due to Magnemite and Magneton, Norman, Sydney, Glacia, and Steven. It can get Shadow Claw and Noras, so it gets Phoebe as well. Swampert has advantages on Roxanne, Watson, Flannery, Winona thanks to an earlier Ice Beam or Rock Tomb Rock Slide, Tate and Liza even in Emerald, Sydney thanks to its fighting moves, Glacia for the same reasons, Drake because of Ice Beam,
And Steven!
Emerald gives Sceptile Wallace, takes Watson and Steven from Blaziken since Watson only has the one Magneton, and takes Steven from Swampert, leaving us at 8-5-8, a tie between Swampert and Sceptile. To add to all this, Sceptile's good for Team Aqua while Swampert's great for Team Magma. Blaziken's good against their Poochane and Carvana lines. And one last thing to lean things towards Mudkip, it can help with the 7.8 too much water routes without going out of your way. Granted, it's not hard to find a good water type in Hoenn anyways, but having one already is a big help. Surf and Waterfall are great moves for it to have no matter what, as 85 special attack is very usable in casual play and Waterfall has a chance to flinch. It can also get Dive, Strength, and Rock Smash. It's almost to the point where one might be able to reasonably solo the entire game with just Swampert due to how amazing its coverage and practical use is, but my bias is clearly showing here. Point is, I shouldn't be doing this analysis for you, especially if you present your conclusion as a definitive answer.
So there you have it. The definitive best starter in Hoenn is Torchic. The definitive best starter, the definitive.
I know you mean well, but if you're going to take on a topic as easily divisive as this, you should look much more carefully at the evidence presented to you. I got all this information off of Bulbapedia, and whatever wasn't explicitly stated, I figured out through connecting the dots that were presented to me. It's a lot to contend with and take into consideration, yes, but it pays off when the final results are pulled together. The only reason why I refuse to elaborate on every last detail in every possible matchup is because I'm aware that all this talk of move lists and specific type advantages is probably turning my audience into the Bionicle 2015 summer wave. If you do end up watching this video, Eryizo, I suggest you do this for your Sinnoh, Unova, and Kalos videos, which I hope will turn out much better for it. A delayed product can eventually be good, but a slapped together without much thought product will be shit forever. I'm Transformers Fanco328, and holy crap I need to get out more. Well, that's what Pokemon Go is for, am I right?